But here's the thing, for those of us that do have this wreckage in the past, we have to move forward. What other option do I have but to just put one foot in front of the other and keep doing the next thing that's available for me?
Welcome to the IGNTD Recovery podcast, a new way forward for anyone looking for answers but feeling left out. If you've been searching for empowerment, triumph, and purpose, you've found them right here. You won't hear the same solutions, and you're not going to have any excuses to fall back on, because IGNTD Recovery allows heroes to rise and become their best selves. I'm Dr. Adi Jaffe, and I can't wait to be your guide on this journey. Are you ready to become an ignited hero?
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the IGNTD Recovery Secrets podcast. I'm Adi Jaffe, and I'm going to talk about something kind of personal today. And the reason it's coming up for me as part of this episode is because I get this question, and we've never really answered it publicly. And so I think it's relevant, and I wanted to address it. And the question is, it kind of comes in a few forms, but the question is, are you a doctor? And it's a more convoluted answer, I think, than anybody really expects when I say that, because I come from a family of physicians. And normally when somebody answers that question, the question is, are you a physician kind of doctor, or are you a different kind of doctor? I'm a different kind of doctor. I have a PhD. The reason it's kind of funny, we've talked about it a handful of times in episodes with Sophie, coming from a family of physicians. My dad was a physician, and my sister's now a physician. PhDs are like the bastardized doctor. I'm not going to lie. It's true. It's like the lower level doc. And we can say what we want about it. I can pretend like it never bothered me. But, it's a thing. Let's just be honest about it. It's a thing. I'm like the other kind of doctor. So that's the first piece of the puzzle, which is important. Now, one of the things that I've noticed happen, I didn't really realize this until I was in the field for a while, is that sometimes people use a PhD in like theology, or a PhD in English, or maybe a PhD in computer science, and be doing work with people around the mental health world. Well, that's not true for me, right? I have a PhD in psychology. My emphasis was in behavioral neuroscience and statistics or assessment when I was studying at UCLA. And so an incredibly well-respected school with incredibly strong background in neuroscience and the field of psychology in general. And so I stayed in that world, but definitely a PhD. And that's where the conversation gets more complicated, and in a way that is hard for people to understand it. So that's why I wanted to actually dedicate an entire episode of this Friday thing for it. And I'm going to preface it with this. Those of us who have struggled in life with mental health, with legal issues, with addictions, have wreckage. Sometimes we have a lot of wreckage, like mountains and mountains of wreckage. Like if you look at my criminal file from that arrest that I've talked about a whole bunch of times, that ended up with that SWAT team and the motorcycle accident, all that stuff, it's like 5 to 6 reams of paper at this point. It's like one of those, when you see a lawyer show, a legal show, and the lawyers have these stacks of paper on their desks. I'm absolutely one of those stacks at this point. And it's not something I'm proud of. It's not something I'm not proud of. It's just my reality. And so when I talk about kind of what is the status of me seeing people, I always have to preface it with my status is heavily affected by the wreckage of how I got here. And I'm not ashamed of it at this point, but it's just part of my reality. And so it's really important to point out and talk to directly. So as you've heard me talk about many, many times before, I had a drug addiction problem, primarily meth, but everything else in between, and was selling a lot of drugs at the time to finance that. When I got arrested, I cleaned my act, went to rehab, failed out of rehab, went to a sober living, and then went to jail. I did a year in jail. Now, here's the thing. When you get out of jail, you can't get a job. This might be new and news for some of you, but you know that application box when you fill out a job for an application? Have you ever been convicted of a felony? I had to check yes. And when you check yes, because it's a crime not to tell the truth on that checkbox, nobody calls you back. Nobody wants to hire you if you have a felony. It's just the way it is. It's just the way it happens. So for 9 months after I got out of jail, I looked for work and could not get hired anywhere. Like not at the mall. The Apple store was starting to become a thing. I couldn't get hired there. I tried everything. Restaurants. I almost got a job. There was a manager of a pizzeria. I'm not going to give their name because they didn't end up hiring me, but there was a manager of a pizzeria who knew some of the people from the sober living house that I lived in, and he was going to give me a job. I was going to be able to, I don't remember even if I was going to make pizzas or serve pizzas or deliver pizzas, but it didn't matter. I almost had a job, and then the guy got moved to a restaurant like an hour and a half away. So I lost that opportunity for a job. So literally for like 9 months, I could not get hired doing anything. And that's when I decided to go back to school. And my dad and I, we had a conversation about it. Like, should I go back to med school? Because I was supposed to be pre-med earlier on in life. And my dad was not quite sure yet that I had what it would take to, A, get into medical school maybe, but to make it through medical school. It's a lot of work, a lot of studies, and I hadn't really proved myself at all. I understood his struggles, right? Like, I had a lot of work to prove myself still. And there was another piece that we talked about at the beginning of that, and it was, would they even let me be a doctor, even if I finished school, because of my criminal past? So we decided to say no, and I applied to a graduate program in psychology, a master's, at Cal State University, Long Beach. They had no check mark, have you been convicted of a felony? They allowed me in, even though I didn't have all the courses I needed. I had to do some makeup stuff, and I did some work. And it was really weird, to be perfectly honest, to go from being a drug dealer who went to jail to sitting in a class. Not going to lie to you, really, really strange. But I did it, and I actually loved being back in school. The reason I'm taking you all the way back there is we knew things were going to be weird when we started. But here's the thing, for those of us that do have this wreckage in the past, we have to move forward. What other option do I have but to just put one foot in front of the other and keep doing the next thing that's available for me? The way I see it, I don't have a lot of other options. So graduate school is the next thing. And I kicked ass in grad school. I don't know if I was really the best student they had in the moment, but if not, I was in the top 3. I killed. 4.0 average. I was in all the office hours. I was doing all the papers. I was doing school like I'd never done it before. And because of that work, I was able to get into UCLA, into the PhD program, which is like one of the top PhD programs in psychology in the world. I was elated. I was excited. Now, it's 2005, so it's now a year, 2.5 years after I got out of jail. I'm not sober anymore, but I'm normal. I'm living a normal life. I'm really, really happy to be in this place in life. And I will never forget, you start getting these letters, less emails back then, but letters from all these organizations. And one of them is the American Psychological Association. And the American Psychological Association, knowing that I just got into one of the top psychology programs in the world, wanted me to become a member, a student member. They had this low rate. I was pretty broke. That was nice. And they wanted me to be part of it. And I was really excited. I submitted my application like that week. And then I waited and I waited and I waited and I got nothing back. And I remember I called them, and it was really hard to get a hold of anybody. And a few months later, I got a letter in the mail that I was rejected. The American Psychological Association wouldn't let me be a student affiliate member. Just so we're clear, this has no standing. This is like becoming a Sierra Club member. Like you pay dues and you have access to kind of nothing because the school gives you access to everything you need to in terms of the stuff APA puts out. So I got rejected from being a student member, even though being a student member gave me nothing. It was like somebody saying, hey, I found a lump of coal on the ground. It has your name on it. Would you like it? You saying, sure, I'll have it. And then them slapping you in the face and saying you can't have it, F you. It was only the first time I ran into this sort of a problem. So I emailed them back and essentially, or wrote them a letter back. I don't remember. Maybe I called and I said, well, it said I was rejected and what happened? What can I do? And what they explained was because of my criminal conviction, I had to now prove that I was worthwhile enough to get in as a student affiliate member of the American Psychological Association. It took 6 to 12 more months, letters of reference, my record, but literally the printout of what happened in my court case, transcripts, more letters of recommendation, personal statements, and all of these other things to be allowed a year later into the American Psychological Association as a student member. Literally, all that allowed me to do was say that I'm a student member of the American Psychological Association. I think it might have given me a discount on paying for their annual conference. You can't do anything with that membership. It doesn't give you a right to do anything else in life other than be a member. And it took me a year of having to prove and give paperwork that I was a worthwhile enough human to do that. Now, this was 2.5 years after I got out of jail. And so I was still very much in the place where I was willing to just be in the doghouse. And I did it and I got in and I was kind of proud of getting in. Around 2007, 2008, this is 2 years later, I was doing my research. I was really into my addiction-related research and neuroscience and all the stuff that I was doing. Publishing papers, doing really well in school. And I decided I wanted to maybe do some clinical work. Now, for the reason I'm dedicating so much time to this is a lot of people don't understand the difference between a clinical psychologist and a research psychologist. When you start in a research program, you don't get necessarily clinical training. So I started going around and trying to figure out what would it take for me to be able to see some clients. And it wasn't easy, and it shouldn't have been easy because I wasn't in that program. But I started talking to people in the clinical program at UCLA, seeing what would be available there. I knew a lot of people in the addiction field by that point, so I started reaching out. And it turned out that I could, through the Matrix Institute, which was a UCLA affiliated treatment program, maybe start teaching some groups. Now, just so we're clear, I'm now 4 years into this, 5 years into researching this. I'm becoming a low-level expert on addiction, right? I've studied the brain, the neuroscience. I've studied treatments and which ones work. I mean, I've done a lot of work. I've studied all the drugs. And so I started leading these educational groups at the Matrix Institute, and I am loving it. It's fun. I'm connecting with families and people who are struggling. I'm loving it a lot. So I want to find out what else can I do to start seeing more and more clients. And I reach around to the Board of Psychology here in California. And I've already gone through that APA experience. So I understand that there's going to be some hoops to jump through. And so I apply to start to get my license. And of course, they ask the questions about a criminal record and all these other things. And it's got to be 2007 or 8. So I'm 5 years past my getting out of jail, just when the process is even starting. And so we do everything. I have to submit all the same stuff that I submitted to the APA, to the American Psychological Association. I have to submit to them, and it takes months and months and months for them to get back to me. And I have to fill out. It's already a pretty complicated process, even if you don't have my issues. So it's a complicated process when we go through it. And because of what happened with my criminal history, my drug use, they have to set up a meeting, a hearing essentially. And in that hearing, they come in, it's recorded. And there's a representative from the medical board in California, and then representative from the board of psychology, because there aren't a lot of people, I guess, with my issue who apply to become licensed psychologists. And so they bring in the medical board for help. And so we're sitting there, and there's a multi-hour interview, and they don't understand anything about what I'm doing. Like, I'm not sober at this point. I've had no issues since I got out of jail, but I'm not sober. And it said I had a drug arrest. Am I in a program? Do I have a sponsor? What meetings do I go to? Are the questions that I get asked all the time. And this is from a licensure board for psychology. And I said, I'm not in the program. I was in it for 3 years. I'm out and not in it anymore. I'm doing great. What's your sobriety date? Well, I'm not in the program. I don't have a sobriety date. I'm not sober. I drink socially. I'm good. And they're having a hard time. I'm married by this point. I have a kid. And so they started asking me questions like, are you saying your wife is your higher power or your sponsor? And it was really frustrating, to be honest. It was really, really, really frustrating. But I knew it was something I had to do to get to the next place. So I sat through it. And at the end of this 2 or 3 hour interview out in Pasadena, they tell us, okay, well, we'll send you our decision. And I have to wait a few more months, and that decision comes. And the decision was I can start on my process to become a licensed clinical psychologist, which was amazing and beautiful. And what has to happen is I have to go into this 5-year random drug testing program. By this point, I'm done with school. It's 2010. I went to jail in 2002, got out in 2002, so at the end of 2002. So it's been 8 years since I got out of jail. My record has now been expunged because I've never failed a drug test. Nothing bad has ever happened since I started my court case. So it's actually been 9 or 10 years since anything has happened. And they placed me on 5 years testing. And I agreed to it. And I agreed to it because it was my only way to get licensed. And I said, you know what? I can't believe they're even giving me a chance. That's great. But here's what happened. I was in school, and so I had to get supervision, and I had to go look for people to get supervision through, and I did. And I worked at the Matrix Institute, and I saw clients, and it was beautiful, and I loved it. And I signed the hours, and I filled out the paperwork, and all this stuff. And every quarter I would do it. But every day when I would wake up, around 6 o'clock in the morning, I would have to call a random number and find out if I was being drug tested that day. And if I was being drug tested that day, I would have to somehow, in the middle of my day, find one of these lab locations that they had around Southern California. And I would have to go and submit to a urine test. Now, I was in school full-time, and I was working full-time, and I'm married with a kid. It wasn't easy. It wasn't easy at all because, one of these places was in Santa Monica, another one was in Hollywood. It's not like there's a bunch of them. And so I would just have to figure out how to put an hour and a half, 2 hours into my day to go urine test. And forget the fact that I'm now an adult male who's totally doing normally in life. And I walk into this place and it's what's called an observed urine. So that means somebody has to look at you peeing into a cup. You guys have listened to me for a while now, so I walk around with this kind of fuck shame moniker around my wrist all the time. I was constantly being reminded that I'm an ex-con, ex-drug addict who needs to be watched and supervised. Every time I wanted to leave the city, which meant that I wouldn't be available the next day for that drug test potentially if they were going to test me, I had to ask for permission. I had to ask for permission. I had to tell them why I'm leaving. And then they would have to say yes or no. And if they said no, I couldn't go. I had to pay money every quarter, and every day I had to make that phone call. And what I realized about 6 months to a year into this experience was, for the first time in 6, 7, 8 years, I feel like a criminal again. I'm not doing anything wrong. I finished school. I got my PhD. I'm married. I have jobs. I'm doing great. I'm helping people. But every day in the morning, I get to feel like a criminal again. And I started resisting. And more, it felt like what I was doing every day was making myself feel terrible about where I am, even though my life was going great. And so I talked to my supervisor, and I wanted to see if there's any way to shorten the process and not make it 5 years, because I was only about a year into this. And about a year and a half into it, I terminated the process. I said to them, you know what, I'm going to put this thing on pause. I'm not going to do this. I can't do this for 5 years. I'm not going to put my life back in this place that it was at 8 years ago for this license. And to be perfectly honest, I didn't know that I wanted to be part of a profession that looked at me 8, 9 years after I had drug problems as still a drug addict, a profession that was purporting to help people get out of that state of shame and help them move forward in their life. I didn't really want to be part of it. So to this day, I think if you look up my license, it said that it was probationary and it was revoked. And it was. I can always go back and start the process again. I didn't screw anything up. I didn't test dirty in any drug test. Nothing happened other than me saying to my supervisor, you know what? I'm out. I don't want this. And so that was not an easy decision to make. But it also wasn't an incredibly difficult one from the standpoint that I tell people every day in my work that they can do anything they want to and they can be anything they want to, and to not let anybody box them and shame them and make them feel less than. And I couldn't live a life where I was letting even an organization like the Board of Psychology in California do that to me. Now, the number of times this has come up in my life is difficult for me to count. When we want to teach people in the field and they want to get continuing education units, if I ask for that license, for the right to give continuing education units, if they know that I've been convicted, they'll pause. Should we give somebody who's been convicted of felonies in his past the right to do this? And I don't lie about it, because why lie about it? It's part of my past. But it happens multiple times every year that somebody says to me, well, I don't know if you can do this. You had a criminal offense. And so I decided to pause it. I'm not a licensed psychologist. I call myself a research psychologist. It's kind of weird to me that the only way you can use the word psychologist is with a license, even though the vast majority of people who get training and get a PhD in psychology don't have a license. But I'm a research psychologist and a coach. And I help people through coaching with my PhD. And the reason I wanted to have an entire episode on it is I know there's some of you listening right now for whom the wreckage of your past has left you unable to do some things. And I get it. I get it. The only thing is, we can't allow that to stop us from doing work. So I end up having to explain this to people regularly, and it's okay. It still makes me feel a million times better than having to wake up every morning and ask people for permission on whether I can leave my city or figure out how to go pee in a cup while somebody watches me. And we all have our boundaries. We all have our borders. We all have the things that we're willing to do and the things we're not willing to do. I'm proud of the work that I'm doing. I'm proud of the work that we've done. I'm proud of the people I've worked with to do that work. And I'm not sorry on any given day of anything that happened, right? Of the jail sentence I went through, of what brought me to that jail sentence, of the work that I've done since to change my life and the life of the people around me. But there's no doubt that there's this heavy burden of a burlap sack full of the bricks of my past that I end up carrying around. And it's probably never going away. I hope it does. I hope there's a day where nobody just thinks ill of either me or my intentions because of that, but I also can't control other people. All I do is control myself. And so I hope that once and for all, this kind of clarifies the specifics of how I got to be this in this weird little place. Dr. Adi Jaffe, not the MD version, the PhD version, who's not a licensed psychologist, but works with people and coaches them to deal with their relationship, mental health, addiction struggles, or whatever they may be. And for all of you out there who are either struggling yourself or have loved ones who are struggling, I want you to know that anything is possible for you, even if you have to try a little bit harder to figure out how exactly you fit into that equation. And as a follow-up, if you like this topic, do me a favor, screenshot, DM, or share it on Instagram and let me know how your specific situation fits in the same mold. I can't wait for the day where we eradicate shame out of these contexts and we let everybody just do their best at all times. I will continue to try to do my best at all times. Thank you so much for tuning in. Have a great, great weekend, and I'll see you next week.
Thank you for tuning in to the Ignited Heroes Recovery Podcast. I really hope you found the information here useful and that we'll see you back here next week. And look, I want to make sure that this podcast is the most useful it can be for you, so please let me know by emailing info@ignited.com if there are any specific topics or questions you'd like to have addressed. As usual, if you like this episode, I would love for you to leave us a 5-star review and rating. Thanks, and see you next week.